The Battle of Rorke's Drift, also known as the Defense of Rorke's Drift, was a battle in the Anglo-Zulu War. The defense of the mission station of Rorke's Drift, under the command of Lieutenant John Chard of the Royal Engineers, and Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, immediately followed the British Army's defeat of the Battle of Isandlwana on the 22nd of January 1879, and continued into the following day, the 23rd of January. Just over 150 British and colonial troops successfully defended the garrison against an intense assault by 3,000 to 4,000 Zulu warriors. The massive but piecemeal Zulu attacks on Rorke's Drift came very close to defeating the tiny garrison, but were ultimately repelled. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded to the defenders, along with a number of other decorations and honours. Prelude. Rorke's Drift, known as Kwajimu in the Zulu language, was a mission station and the former trading post of James Rorke, an Irish merchant. It was located near a drift, or ford, on the Buffalo River, which at the time formed the border between the British colony of Natal and the Zulu Kingdom. On the 9th of January 1879, the British No. 3 column, under Lord Chelmsford, arrived and encamped at the drift. On the 11th of January, the day after the British ultimatum to the Zulus expired, the column crossed the river and encamped on the Zulu bank. A small force consisting of B Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment of Foot under Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead was detailed to garrison the post, which had been turned into a supply depot and hospital under the overall command of Brevet Major Henry Spaulding, 104th Foot, a member of Chelmsford's staff. On the 20th of January, after reconnaissance patrolling and building of a track for its wagons, Chelmsford's column marched to Isandlwana, approximately 6 miles to the east, leaving behind the small garrison. This company numbered between 100 and 350 men. Captain Thomas Rhinefifth's G Company of the 1st, 24th Foot was ordered to move up from its station at Helpmekar, 10 miles to the southeast, after its own relief arrived to further fortify the drift. Later that evening a portion of the No. 2 column under Brevet Colonel Anthony Durnford, late of the Royal Engineers, arrived at the drift and camped on the Zulu bank, where it remained through the next day. Late on the evening of the 21st of January, Durnford was ordered to Isandlwana, as was a small detachment of No. Chard rode ahead of his detachment to Isandlwana on the morning of the 22nd of January to clarify his orders, but was sent back to Rorke's Drift with only his wagon and its driver to construct defensive positions for the expected reinforcement company, passing Durnford's column en route in the opposite direction. Sometime around noon on the 22nd, Major Spaulding left the station for Helpmekar to ascertain the whereabouts of Rhinefifth's G Company, which was now overdue. He left Chard in temporary command. Chard rode down to the drift itself where the engineers' camp was located. Soon thereafter, 2 survivors from Isandlwana, Lieutenant Gert Adendorf of the 1st, 3rd NNC and a trooper from the Natal Carbineers, arrived bearing the news of the defeat and that a part of the Zulu Empire was approaching the station. Upon hearing this news, Chard, Bromhead, and another of the station's officers, Acting Assistant Commissary James Dalton, held a quick meeting to decide the best course of action, whether to attempt to retreat to Helpmekar or to defend their current position. Dalton pointed out that a small column, traveling in open country and burdened with carts full of hospital patients, would be easily overtaken and defeated by a numerically superior Zulu force, and so it was soon agreed that the only acceptable course was to remain and fight defensive preparations. Once the British officers decided to stay, Chard and Bromhead directed their men to make preparations to defend the station. With the garrison's some 400 men working quickly, a defensive perimeter was constructed out of mealie bags. This perimeter incorporated the storehouse, the hospital, and a stout stone kraal. The buildings were fortified, with loopholes knocked through the external walls and the external doors barricaded with furniture. At about 3:30 p.m., a mixed troop of about 100 native horse under Lieutenant Alfred Henderson arrived at the station after having retreated in good order from Isandlwana. They volunteered to picket the far side of the Oscarburg, the large hill that overlooked the station and from behind which the Zulus were expected to approach. With the defences nearing completion and battle approaching, Chad had several hundred men available to him. Bromhead's B Company, Stevenson's large NNC Company, Henderson's NNH Troop, and various others drawn from various British and colonial units. Adendorf also stayed, while the trooper who had ridden in with him galloped on to warn the garrison at Help Mecca. The force was sufficient, in Chad's estimation, to fend off the Zulus. Chad posted the British soldiers around the perimeter, adding some of the more able patients, the casuals and civilians, and those of the NNC who possessed firearms along the barricade. The rest of the NNC, armed only with spears, were posted outside the Melia Bag and Biscuit Box barricade within the stone-walled cattle kraal. The approaching Zulu force was vastly larger. The Udloko, Uthalwana, Indlunder Amabutho of married men in their 30s and 40s and the Indluyengwaributho of young unmarried men mustered 3,000 to 4,000 warriors. None of them engaged during the battle at Isandlwana. This Zulu force was the loins or reserve of the army at Isandlwana and is often referred to as the Undercorps. It was directed to swing wide of the British left flank and pass west and south of Isandlwana Hill itself, in order to position itself across the line of communication and retreat of the British and the colonial allies in order to prevent their escape back into Natal by way of the Buffalo River ford leading to Rorke's Drift. By the time the Undercorps reached Rorke's Drift at 4:30 p.m., they had fast marched some 20 miles from the morning encampment they had left at around 8 a.m., and they would spend almost the next 11.5 hours continuously storming the British fortifications at Rorke's Drift. Most Zulu warriors were armed with an assegai and a shield made of cowhide. The Zulu army drilled in the personal and tactical use and coordination of this weapon system. Some Zulus also had old muskets and antiquated rifles, though their marksmanship training was poor, and the quality and supply of powder and shot was dreadful. The Zulu attitude towards firearms was that the generality of Zulu warriors, however, would not have firearms, the arms of a coward, as they said, for they enable the poltroon to kill the brave without awaiting his attack, even though their fire was not accurate. It was responsible for 5 of the 17 British deaths at Rorke's Drift. While the Undercorps had been led by Nkosi Kamapitha at the Isandlwana battle, the command of the Undercorps passed to Prince Dabulamanzi Kampanda when Kamapitha was wounded during the pursuit of British fugitives from Isandlwana. Prince Dabulamanzi was considered rash and aggressive, and this characterization was borne out by his violation of King Setshwayo's order to act only in defense of Zululand against the invading British soldiers and not carry the war over the border into enemy territory. The Rorke's Drift attack was an unplanned raid rather than any organized counter-invasion, with many of the Undercorps Zulus breaking off to raid other African kraals and homesteads while the main body advanced on Rorke's Drift. At about 4 p.m., Surgeon James Reynolds, Otto Witt, the Swedish missionary who ran the mission at Rorke's Drift, and Army Chaplain Reverend George Smith came down from the Oscarburg hillside with the news that a body of Zulus was fording the river to the southeast and was no more than 5 minutes away. At this point, Witt decided to depart the station, as his family lived in an isolated farmhouse about 30 kilometers away, and he wanted to be with them. Witt's native servant, Umquel Nantabar, left with him, so too did one of the hospital patients, Lieutenant Thomas Purvis of the 1st, 3rd NNC. Battle. At about 4:20 p.m., the battle began with Lieutenant Henderson's NNH troopers, stationed behind the Oscarburg, briefly engaging the vanguard of the main Zulu force. However, tired from the battle and retreat from Isndalwana and short of carbine ammunition, Henderson's men departed for Help Mecca. Henderson himself reported to Lieutenant Chard that the enemy were close and that his men would not obey his orders but were going off to help Mecca. Henderson then followed his departing men. Upon witnessing the withdrawal of Henderson's NNH troop, Captain Stevenson's NNC company abandoned the cattle kraal and fled, greatly reducing the strength of the defending garrison. Outraged that Stevenson and some of his Colonial NCOs also fled from the barricades, a few British soldiers fired after them, killing Corporal William Anderson. With the Zulus nearly at the station, the garrison now numbered between 154 and 156 men. Of these, only Bromhead's company could be considered a cohesive unit. Additionally, up to 39 of his company were at the station as hospital patients, although only a handful of these were unable to take up arms. With fewer men, Chard realized the need to modify the defenses, and he gave orders for the construction of a biscuit box wall through the middle of the post in order to make possible the abandonment of the hospital side of the station if the need arose. At 4:30 p.m., the Zulus rounded the Oscarburg and approached the south wall. Private Frederick Hitch, posted as lookout atop the storehouse, reported a large column of Zulus approaching. The Zulu vanguard, 600 men of the Ndlu-Yingwa, attacked the south wall, which joined the hospital and the storehouse. The British opened fire at 500 yards. The majority of the attacking Zulu force swept around to attack the north wall, while a few took cover and were either pinned by continuing British fire or retreated to the terraces of Oscarburg. There they began a harassing fire of their own. As this occurred, another Zulu force swept onto the hospital and northwest wall. Those British on the barricades, including Dalton and Bromhead, were soon engaged in fierce hand-to-hand fighting. The British wall was too high for the Zulus to scale, so they resorted to crouching under the wall, trying to get hold of the defenders' Martini Henry rifles, slashing at British soldiers with assegais or firing their weapons through the wall. At places, they clambered over each other's bodies to drive the British off the walls but were driven back. Zulu fire, both from those under the wall and around the Oscarburg, inflicted a few casualties, and 5 of the 17 defenders who were killed or mortally wounded in the action were struck while at the north wall. Defense of the hospital. Chard realized that the north wall, under almost constant Zulu attack, could not be held in. At 6 p.m., he pulled his men back into the yard, abandoning the front 2 rooms of the hospital in the process. The hospital was becoming untenable, the loopholes had become a liability, as rifles poking out were grabbed at by the Zulus, but if the holes were left empty, the Zulu warriors stuck their own weapons through to fire into the rooms. Among the soldiers assigned to the hospital were Corporal William Wilson Allen and Privates Cole, Dunbar, Hitch, Horrigan, John Williams, Joseph Williams, Alfred Henry Hook, Robert Jones, and William Jones. Privates Horrigan, John Williams, Joseph Williams and patients tried to hold the hospital entrance with rifles and fixed bayonets. Joseph Williams defended a small window, and 14 dead Zulus were found later beneath the window. As it became clear that the front of the building was being taken by the Zulus, John Williams began to hack a way of escape through the wall dividing the central room and a corner room in the back of the hospital. As he made a passable hole, the door into the central room came under furious attack from the Zulus, and he only had time to drag 2 bedridden patients out before the door gave way. The corner room that John Williams had pulled the 2 patients into was occupied by Private Hook and another 9 patients. John Williams hacked at the wall to the next room with his pickaxe, as Hook held off the Zulus. A firefight erupted as the Zulus fired through the door and Hook returned fire, but not without an assegai striking his helmet and stunning him. Williams made the hole big enough to get into the next room, which was occupied only by patient Private Waters, and dragged the patients through. The last man out was Hook, who killed some Zulus who had knocked down the door before he dived through the hole. John Williams once again went to work, spurred by the fact that the roof was now on fire. As Hook defended the hole and Waters continued to fire through a loophole. After 50 minutes, the hole was large enough to drag the patients through, and the men, save Privates Waters and Beckett, who hid in the wardrobe, were now in the last room, being defended by Privates Robert Jones and William Jones. From here, the patients clambered out through a window and then ran across the yard to the barricade. Of the 11 patients, 9 survived the trip, as did all the able-bodied men. According to James Henry Reynolds, only 4 defenders were killed in the hospital. Reportedly, Jenkins was killed after being seized and stabbed, together with Private Adams, who also refused to move. Private Cole, assigned to the hospital, was killed when he ran outside. Another hospital patient killed was Trooper Hunter of the Natal Mounted Police. Among the hospital patients who escaped were a Corporal Mayer of the NNC, Bombardier Lewis of the Royal Artillery, and Trooper Green of the Natal Mounted Police, who was wounded in the thigh by a spent bullet. Private Conley with a broken leg was pulled to safety by Hook, although Conley's leg was broken again in the process. The cattle kraal and the bastion. The evacuation of the burning hospital completed the shortening of the perimeter. As night fell, the Zulu attacks grew stronger. The cattle kraal came under renewed assault and was evacuated by 10 p.m., leaving the remaining men in a small bastion around the storehouse. Throughout the night, the Zulus kept up a constant assault against the British positions. Zulu attacks only began to slacken after midnight, and they finally ended by 2 a.m., being replaced by a constant harassing fire from Zulu firearms until 4 a.m. By that time, the garrison had lost 14 dead. 2 others were mortally wounded and 8 more, including Dalton, were seriously wounded. Virtually every man had some kind of wound. They were all exhausted, having fought for the better part of 10 hours and were running low on ammunition. Of 20,000 rounds in reserve at the mission, only 900 remained. Aftermath. As dawn broke, the British could see that the Zulus were gone. All that remained were the dead and severely wounded. Patrols were dispatched to scout the battlefield, recover rifles, and look for survivors, many of whom were executed when found. At roughly 7 a.m., an empire of Zulus suddenly appeared, and the British manned their positions again. No attack materialized, however, as the Zulus had been on the move for 6 days prior to the battle and had not eaten properly for 2. In their ranks were hundreds of wounded, and they were several days' march from any supplies. Soon after their appearance, the Zulus left the way they had come. Around 8 a.m., another force appeared, and the Redcoats left their breakfast to man their positions again. However, the force turned out to be the vanguard of Lord Chelmsford's relief column. Breakdown of British and Colonial casualties. 1st 24th Foot. 4 killed or mortally wounded in action, 2 wounded. 2nd 24th Foot. 9 killed or mortally wounded in action, 9 wounded. Commissariat and Transport Department. 1 killed in action, 1 wounded. Natal Mounted Police. 1 killed in action, 1 wounded. 1st, 3rd NNC. 1 killed in action. 2nd, 3rd NNC. 2 wounded. Also, as mentioned, 1 member of Stevenson's 2nd, 3rd NNC, Corporal William Anderson, was killed by British fire while fleeing the station just prior to the arrival of the Zulus. 351 Zulu bodies were counted after the battle, but it has been estimated that at least 500 wounded and captured Zulus might have been massacred as well. Having witnessed the carnage at Isandlwana, the members of Chelmsford's relief force had no mercy for the captured, wounded Zulus they came across, nor did the station's defenders. Trooper William James Clark of the Natal Mounted Police described in his diary that, altogether we buried 375 Zulus and some wounded were thrown into the grave. Seeing the manner in which our wounded had been mutilated after being dragged from the hospital, we were very bitter and did not spare wounded Zulus. Laband, in his book The Zulu Response to the British Invasion of 1879, accepts the estimate of 600 that Shepstone had from the Zulus. Samuel Pitt, who served as a private in B Company during the battle, told the Western Mail in 1914 that the official enemy death toll was too low. We reckon we had accounted for 875, but the books will tell you 400 or 500. Lieutenant Horace Smith Dorian, a member of Chelmsford's staff, wrote that the day after the battle an improvised gallows was used for hanging Zulus who were supposed to have behaved treacherously.